Again, welcome to EPI Research Methods. In this lectures, we're going to discuss about research process. So our topic is overview of the research process. So we're going to discuss about what is a research and also explain the steps in the research process. We're also going to describe the basic component of each step. Also, we're going to use the steps as an organizing mechanism for a research project. So first we started with what is a research. Here we say research is a systematic process based on a scientific method that facilitates the identification of relationships and determination of differences in order to answer a question. So again, a research is a scientific method. We need to follow a systematic process. And this systematic process is based on scientific method that will facilitate the identification of relationships. We know most of the time in a research or research studies, we want to find the differences in the variables. If there's any relationship between the variables or there's any causal effect, for example, cigarette smoking causes lung cancer. We can do a studies on this. So now we are going to measure some of the factors, the variables relating to smoking. And we compare it with the outcome of a cancer. So in this case, smoking will be our independent variable and cancer will be our dependent variable. So again, a research is a systematic process based on scientific method that will facilitate the identification of relationship between two or more variables. In terms of the cigarette smoking cause lung cancer example, we may have more than only cigarette smoking. Maybe there are other factors, good nutrition, physical activities, and taking the right liquid medication, etc. This all may have the outcome of the lung cancer. So we want to identify the relationships between variables and also the determination of differences in order to answer our question. So there are 4 keys to scientific method. Since we said the research, again, is a scientific method, our goal now is to understand the concept of, again, a scientific method. So here we say there are 4 keys to scientific method. Scientific method, we need to generate hypothesis. Generate hypothesis. From there, we have our observation. Observation is collecting data, data collections. Then if we have a data, we can analyze our data to test our hypothesis. After we test our hypothesis, we make our conclusion. Then we compare the results from the previous work. So those are, again, a scientific method. Always a scientific method, we need to come up with some hypothesis. We need to have some data to test the hypothesis. Then we analyze our results, come with a conclusion. So we said the research process is, again, statement of a problem. That is the first step. We need to state our problem very clearly. So we have to specify and also justify a problem. And the problem is stated very clear. The next step, we take our hypothesis, if there is a hypothesis, or we need to formulate a research question. We did this in statistics, saying that, okay, in statistics, if you want to do inferential statistics, we can either do estimation, regression, or hypothesis. Hypothesis means we have some claim already. Let's say we want to do a studies in 2020. If the adults in New York City between the age of 20 to 30 are obese or they weigh over 200 pounds, but we also have the data of 1970 that the same age category of adult in 1970 in New York City, the average weight was 140 pounds. Now we want to see if it's more or less. So in this case, I can use a hypothesis because I have a claim. I know some fact about what I'm going to do, previous results. So now I'm going to collect it so that I state my hypothesis. Normally we have 2 types of hypothesis, the null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. The null hypothesis, which we call the HO, will be the claim of 1970, 140 pounds for the adult age between 20 to 30. Then the alternative hypothesis always will go against the null hypothesis. So the alternative hypothesis, we can say either is not equal to 140, which means it can be greater or less. We call that two-way testing. Or we can say greater than 140 one way or less than 140. So again, research process, we need to state our problem first. Why we want to do it. Research means we have a problem. And our goal is to come up with a result and answer. So next step, we get our hypothesis. That's if we have a claim. Now, if we don't have any claim and we cannot generate any hypothesis, then we need to formulate our research question. Normally, we can formulate our research question based on the statement of the problem we have. So the research question has to be precise, testable statements or questions of the research problem. The next step now, we have to do our review of literature. This is a collection and summary of a related or relevant studies. I will use the term relate. Because review of literature, I want to get the studies that has been done previously, and that studies is either the same as what I'm doing, or they are related to each other. So after we do the review of literature, review of literature will even help us to get the background of our studies or our research. Next, we do our measurements. This will be the operationalization of concept. Here we can have our tools, etc., get some framework done, if you have any thresholds for some values, etc. Then the next step, we are going to get our data. So sample selection. We know most studies, we can't use population because population is too large and it's very expensive to collect data from all population. So we need a sample. The sample collection, again, we have different methods. It can be simple random sampling or systematic or stratified random sampling, etc. So after we collect our sample, then we do our data analysis. We analyze our data. Again, our sample is our data. The next step, we analyze it using any statistics techniques or method, or using any data analysis algorithms. So we will go through the steps again, one at a time, step by step. So first, we start with the statement of the problem. We have some examples here. One example is the proportion of obese American youth is increasing at an alarming rate, or an unusual high number of young men with rare opportunistic infection are being seen in New York and California clinics. This is the concept of HIV/AIDS problem. This was in the early 1980s when they found out a young, middle-aged men are having a disease that normally old people around 70, 80 plus may have, which is a rare, serious pneumonia problem infections. So that can be a question. Another problem, that can be a problem. Another problem here, again, children in rural areas of China have elevated blood lead levels, or the mine workers in sub-Saharan Africa have higher than expected incidence of tuberculosis, TB. So this would be a problem. Let's say in sub-Saharan South Africa, TB should be around 50%, 5% of the population is normal. Anything above 5% of the population have TB, then there's a problem, maybe a pandemic. So we need to do a study, find out. So now we have the problems. We haven't generated a question now. Now, next step is generating the hypothesis or formulating a research question. So based on our first problem we have, let's go by a proportion of obese American youth is increasing at alarming rate. So maybe these youth, American youth, are not active, maybe doing physical training. It can be from games, etc. So we come up with this question: an increasing prevalence of electronic entertainment contribute to the increase in obesity among American youth. Then the second one: what do the young men with the rare infection have in common with one another? So these are the studies we are going to do. And also, what are the potential environment causes of lead poison among Chinese children? And also, occupational lung irritation among minors in Africa contribute to the risk of tuberculosis. So first we have our problem. Again, this is the research process. First step, we stated our problem very clear. Second step, if we have a hypothesis, that's a claim before we can generate a hypothesis. If not, then we can formulate a question from our problem based on the problem. The next step, we are going to do our review relevant studies information. Here to know the background of our studies. If these studies have been done by other authors or related, we may know. So here we are going to participate in a scientific method, help to refine the hypothesis or research question. After going through literature review, we may have more knowledge of the background of our studies. So maybe that can help us to refine our research question again or refine the hypothesis. Also, it can suggest a specific study design choices. We find the literature review, the design methods the authors use. What are the common ones? What was the result? So from there, we may even decide to use similar study design. So that will suggest a specific study design choice. Also to indicate what will be new to the current knowledge from the literature review. So after that, we have the background, we have our questions, we already generate our problem, we know our problem. So next step now, we need data. So we have to collect our data. We can select the subject, either it will be individual people or groups of people, or maybe we are going to use the secondary data which came from published research results. Then measuring the constructs, are we going to use the survey questions or lab results or effect sizes? Then next step, we prepare for our data for analysis. Also, we need to do what is called the data preparation techniques. So next, we analyze our data. Here we say specifically testing the hypothesis or answering the research questions. So particular method of analysis, they will depend on what? The research questions, the study design, type of subject, and also the level of measurement of constructs. Because again, for example, in data analytical field, we have so many different algorithms to analyze the data. So it will be based on the research question or type of studies that we may decide whether to use classification, clustering, hypothesis testing, t-test, chi-test. There are so many techniques to analyze the data. After that, we do our last step, which is reporting our result. The result can be reported to a conference, especially if I'm writing dissertation or capstone or thesis for a graduate student, or to a journal, a peer-reviewed journal article, publish it, or maybe I'm going to present it in a conference, presentation of a paper in the conference. Or results should be decimated in some manner so that they can be contribute to the scientific method. So this will be our conclusion of our lectures. Again, in these lectures, what we are learning is what is a research process. So the overview of research process. And also we went through the definition of what is a research. And also we know a research is use a scientific method. So we went through the 4 stages of scientific method. Then from there, we went through all the stages of, again, a research method. which here we start with the problem, statement of problem, the hypothesis or generate research question. Then we do the literature of review, then measurements. Then we do the sample collection, that is the data collection. Then we analyze our data. We come summarize our results, then we again publish our results and find a way to give the result to the scientific community. So again, that will be the conclusion of our lectures on overview of research process. Thank you. Bye.